the Heisman Trophy, the award given to the most pulverizing college player every season. With the ceremony coming up, I thought I'd rank every single Heisman. Let me know who you think the next Heisman will be. I'm recording this before the Big Ten Championship, but I still think it's going to be Fernando Mendoza. Okay, I didn't finish this video before the Big Ten Championship, and it seems pretty clear that Fernando Mendoza has like a 99% chance to be the Heisman. Here's Mendoza's stats. His passing yards are not really on par with a lot of players. Still though, out of the 65 Heismans on this list, if I were to include him, he would be around like 35th place. And obviously he still has the playoffs to add to his statistics. Also, I want to mention I was sick for like half the time while making this, so my voice will sound different at different parts. I also had to re-record some stuff, so I'm sorry, and I will get this fixed in the future. Before the video starts, let me tell you how I conducted my rankings. First off, I'm only doing dudes since 1960 because before then there's very limited stats and footage. 1960 is about the oldest I could go to still make it entertaining. The first step I did in ranking the players is I graded them based on their position. So I compared them with other dudes in their position that won the Heisman. Then I ranked every person in terms of their position group, and then I combined all those to make my final list. So what did I grade them on specifically? Well, I did position-specific stats. So for quarterback, it would be touchdown-interception ratio, passing yards, completion percentage, passer rating, and any rushing stats they had as well. For running backs, it'd be rush yards, rush touchdowns, yards per carry, and any receiving stats. For wide receivers, it would obviously be receptions, receiving touchdowns, yards per catch, as well as any special teams or rushing stats. And then for defensive players, interceptions, pass deflections, tackles, whatever. And then there were some things I graded every single player on that I think every Heisman needs to have. So I grade every single player on the percentage of first place votes they got. I think the more first place votes you get shows that you were probably a better Heisman. There's also one thing every Heisman needs to have, and that's a Heisman moment. I grade every single person's Heisman moment on a scale of 1 through 10. And finally, every Heisman needs to have a big win or big performance. This is kind of similar to Heisman moment, but it's not exactly the same. I'm not really going to be considering the team's record the Heisman was on unless they won the national championship or something, because that doesn't really determine how good the individual player was. Alright, so now let's get into the rankings. In 65th and last place is Joe Bellino. He was a running back out of Navy, and he is the oldest winner on this list, winning it in 1960. Although he had a phenomenal season, his stats really don't hold up to what is currently being done. Likewise, right above him is Ernie Davis, running back out of Syracuse. His stats are actually a little bit worse, but I'd say his impact was much greater on his team and on the sport in general, as he was the first African-American Heisman winner. In 63rd place is Archie Griffin's 1975 season. Now, Archie Griffin's notorious for being the only person to win 2 Heismans. I am going to be grading those different seasons separately, even though it's the same person. His 1975 season was not as amazing or impactful as his first one. He only had 4 rushing touchdowns, but still won 56% of first place Heisman votes and had a big performance against Michigan. At 62 is the lowest rated quarterback, and that would be Jim Plunkett. Plunkett was a QB out of Stanford, obviously went on to have a solid NFL career, but in his Heisman season, he threw 19 touchdowns to 19 interceptions. He did have a big bowl win, but his numbers really aren't that impressive. Right above him is QB Gary Beban. He went to UCLA, and he was the Heisman Trophy winner in 1967. His numbers also aren't very impressive in terms of the Heisman. At number 60 is Tim Brown out of Notre Dame, my favorite college. Now, Tim Brown's like a receiver. He was also a kick and punt returner. His receiving stats are kind of a letdown, though. He didn't even have 1,000 yards. However, he did have a pretty solid Heisman moment where he returned 2 punt returns for touchdowns in the same game against Michigan State. At 59 is the 2001 Heisman, Eric Crouch. Now, he played at Nebraska, and he ran a Nebraska-style offense. He actually threw more interceptions than touchdowns. However, his rushing stats were pretty solid, but if you're a QB and you throw more interceptions than touchdowns, you can only be so high. At 58 is Miami QB Gino Torretta. Not really much interesting to say about him. However, my dad said he thought the worst Heisman was either Eric Crouch or Gino Torretta. Alright, these next couple aren't really that interesting, so I'm going to do kind of a speed round up until we get to the top 50. At 57 is the 1964 Heisman out of Notre Dame, John Huarte. At 56 is former USC running back Mike Garrett. At 55 is former Navy QB Roger Staubach. At 54 is former Auburn QB Pat Sullivan. At 53 is Oregon State's Terry Baker from 1963. At 52 is Steve Spurrier, the longtime South Carolina head coach, and he actually played QB and kicker, so his Heisman moment includes him leading a game-winning drive and then kicking the game-winning field goal himself. At 51 is actually a receiver, Johnny Rodgers, the 1972 Heisman out of Nebraska. At 50 is Oklahoma's 1969 Heisman Steve Owens. He was a running back who rushed for 1,523 yards and 23 touchdowns. Right above him is John Cappelletti out of Penn State, and he had pretty similar numbers, but the most famous part of him winning the Heisman was the emotional speech he gave afterwards. At 48 is South Carolina's 1980 Heisman George Rogers. He had a great season, as well as a great performance in a win over number 4 Georgia. At 47 is Chris Weinke out of Florida State. Weinke threw for 4,000 yards over the course of the season and had a big win against number 4 Florida. Right above him is Florida's Danny Werfel. He had pretty similar numbers to Weinke, but Werfel won the national championship against FSU. At 45 is Archie Griffin's first Heisman season. Obviously out of Ohio State, he had more rushing yards than his other Heisman season, as well as 3 times the amount of touchdowns. He also had a big performance in a Rose Bowl win over USC. Oklahoma's Billy Sims comes in at 44. He led the nation in rush attempts, rush yards, and rushing touchdowns, and had a big game against undefeated FSU. At 43 is Mark Ingram, the running back out of Alabama. Mark Ingram's stats weren't absolutely amazing, but they don't really showcase how instrumental he was to this team. Not only did he have 2 touchdowns in the national championship against Texas, leading them to a win, but his Heisman moment came against South Carolina, where he carried the ball basically every play of the drive to put Alabama up 2 scores. At 42 is Herschel Walker, the 1982 Heisman out of Georgia, and his Heisman season was arguably not even his best season, as the season before that he had more yards and touchdowns. That's not to say Herschel Walker didn't have an amazing season though, receiving 70% of first place votes and having a big performance in the SEC championship. At 41 is Doug Flutie. Flutie's numbers weren't overly insane, but he had arguably the best Heisman moment ever, completing a game-winning Hail Mary against Miami to upset them. This even created a term called the Flutie effect, in which after this instance, Boston College saw a 30% increase in student applications after they saw that. Right above him is Vinny Testaverde out of Miami. Testaverde's numbers weren't overly impressive as well, but he had a 4-touchdown outing against Oklahoma, the number 1 team in the nation, cementing his Heisman win. At 39 is 2002 Heisman Carson Palmer. He won it after throwing 33 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, putting up pretty respectable stats along the way. Right above him is Jason White out of Oklahoma, who just has slightly better stats. The saddest thing about Jason White is that the background South Park character is arguably more popular. At 37 is Charles White out of USC. He had over 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns in his Heisman campaign. At 36 is Andre Ware. He went to Houston and made every game entertaining, with his best game being a 475-yard, 4-touchdown performance against ranked Texas Tech. At 35 is Ty Detmer out of BYU. In his Heisman year, he passed for over 5,000 yards and also beat number 1 ranked Miami. At 34 is Matt Leinart. Although those numbers aren't eye-popping, his best performance definitely came in the national championship, where he had 5 touchdowns, leading USC to a win. At 33 is Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was obviously a game-changing player whenever he was on the field. He passed for over 4,500 yards and also had 42 pass touchdowns to 5 interceptions. At 32 is 2008 Heisman out of Oklahoma, Sam Bradford. Bradford threw for 50 touchdowns to 8 interceptions and had many amazing moments, including this famous flip to lead Oklahoma to a Big 12 championship. At 31 is Earl Campbell. In his Heisman season, Earl Campbell had over 1,700 yards along with 18 touchdowns, with his best performance coming against Texas A&M, where he had 222 yards and 4 touchdowns. At 30 is Eddie George. He absolutely went off in 1995, having over 1,800 rushing yards as well as 23 touchdowns, with his best performance being a 200-yard, 3-touchdown outing against Notre Dame. Then at 29 is Ron Dane, the former Nebraska running back. Dane had over 1,800 yards and 19 rushing touchdowns and had 76% of first-place votes for his Heisman win. At 28 is Charles Woodson. I will say these dudes that played multiple positions are very hard to grade because they have more stats than anybody else. In Woodson's Heisman campaign, he played defense, offense, and special teams. He was best on defense, where he had 7 interceptions throughout the season. On offense, he had 11 catches for 231 yards and 2 touchdowns. On special teams, he had a famous punt return touchdown against Ohio State. Likewise, at 27 is Travis Hunter, the most recent Heisman winner. Travis Hunter famously played offense and defense, being stellar on both sides of the ball. On defense, he had 4 interceptions and 11 pass deflections. And on offense, he was one of the best receivers in the country, catching 96 passes for 1,258 yards and 15 touchdowns. Now, he didn't really have an amazing Heisman moment. When I think of a single Travis Hunter play to define him, it would be the diving interception against TCU 2 seasons ago. But he did have a good performance against Baylor, having 130 receiving yards as well as a game-winning forced fumble. O.J. Simpson comes right above him, and although his numbers are a bit lower than some dudes he's ahead of, for his time, O.J. was clearly the best player. He had 85% of first place votes and had an amazing performance in the Rose Bowl against IU. Alright, now getting into the top 25. And 25th is Desmond Howard. Howard was a very good player in multiple facets of the game, as he was one of the best receivers and returners in the entire country. In his Heisman season, Howard had 61 catches for 950 yards and 19 touchdowns, but he also had 3 return touchdowns, the most famous of which being against Ohio State, in which he struck a Heisman pose after doing it, starting the term Heisman moment. In 24 is 2016 Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. Lamar took the college world by storm that season, especially after destroying number 2 Florida State. While Lamar didn't have the best passing numbers, his rushing stats as well as many big performances in big games showed why he deserved to be the Heisman. In 23rd place is Troy Smith, 2005 Heisman from Ohio State. Troy's stats were obviously solid, but the most eye-popping stat is that he won 91% of first place votes, with his best game coming against Ohio State's rivals, number 2 Michigan, where he threw 4 touchdowns to 1 interception and led them to a big win. At 22nd is Bo Jackson. Jackson's numbers aren't exactly eye-popping compared to the dudes he's above, but anybody who watched him can tell you that he was one of the greatest players of all time. And I know my dad would be very upset if I even had Bo Jackson a spot lower than where he currently is. In 21st place is Tim Tebow. Now, Tim Tebow's Heisman season didn't really have a lot of the most memorable moments of his college career, but obviously he still deserved the Heisman. Him being so dominant in the running game along with being a solid passer made him the best player in college football. In his Heisman season, Tim Tebow had 23 rushing touchdowns, along with 895 yards on the ground, with his best performance being against number 8 Kentucky, where he had 330 yards and 5 touchdowns, leading the Gators to a massive win. At 20 is Jameis Winston. Jameis was a redshirt freshman and threw for over 4,000 yards, along with 40 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. Winston was clearly the best player in the country, and what proved this is his national championship performance. He had 250 yards and 2 touchdowns to beat number 2 ranked Auburn and bring Florida State the Natty. At 19 is Kyler Murray. Murray threw for over 4,300 passing yards, along with 42 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He was phenomenal on the ground too, rushing for over 1,000 yards and having 12 touchdowns. His best performance came against number 14 Texas in the Big 12 championship, where Murray had 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, leading Oklahoma to a win. At 18 is Johnny Manziel. He was a freshman in the SEC and absolutely took the world by storm. Manziel threw for 3,706 yards with 26 touchdowns to only 9 interceptions. He had 1,410 yards and 21 touchdowns on the ground. Along with this, Manziel had probably the definition of a Heisman performance, leading Texas A&M to a win over number 1 Alabama, including this infamous play, which is one of the best Heisman moments ever. Manziel fumbled the ball to himself, got it back, and then threw a touchdown, helping lead the way for the Aggies to beat the Crimson Tide. At 17 is Marcus Allen out of USC. In his Heisman season, he had 2,342 yards and 22 touchdowns, with his best performance coming against Washington State, where he had 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. At 16 is Rashaan Salam out of Colorado. He had over 2,000 yards rushing as well as 24 touchdowns on the ground, having one of the best statistical seasons ever. At 15 is Mike Rozier out of Nebraska. From 1983, Rozier had over 2,100 rushing yards and 29 touchdowns. He won 68.8% of first place votes, leading to his Heisman victory. At 14 is Derrick Henry. And once you saw this dude play, he was obviously the best player in the country, having over 2,200 yards and 28 touchdowns. In the national championship, Henry had 158 yards and 3 touchdowns to lead the Crimson Tide to a win. At number 13 is Charlie Ward. Now, I'm sure many of you know this, but Charlie Ward actually went on to play in the NBA instead of the NFL. Anyways, Ward had an absolutely fantastic 1993 season. He only passed for a bit over 3,000 yards and had 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But he had many big wins, including the national championship against Nebraska. This led to him getting 92.5% of first place votes that year, making him one of the best to ever do it. Right above him is Baker Mayfield from 2017. Baker had over 4,600 yards, along with 43 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Furthermore, he had a 70.6 completion percentage. Baker led the Sooners to a Big 12 title and received over 80% of first place votes for the Heisman. Right above him is actually Bryce Young. Bryce Young threw for over 4,800 yards, as well as 47 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. His best performance came against Georgia in the SEC Championship, where he had 461 yards and 4 touchdowns, leading the Crimson Tide to a win. However, they did not win the national championship that year. All right, now we're into the top 10. These are the top 10 Heismans ever, and if you really think about it, the top 10 seasons ever. Coming in at number 10 is Robert Griffin III out of Baylor. In 2011, Robert Griffin made Baylor a must-see team. He threw 37 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions and was very solid on the ground as well. But Robert Griffin had some amazing moments for this Baylor team, including 2 major plays against Oklahoma, which secured his Heisman win. One being a tip pass that would go on to be a 90-yard touchdown. And at the end of the game, he made a beautiful game-winning throw to upset the number 5 Oklahoma Sooners. In all of college football, RG3 is the most electrifying player, and that's why he's at number 10. At number 9 is Jaden Daniels. He had some of the best stats we have ever seen, throwing 40 touchdowns to 4 interceptions and being amazing on the ground too. The real thing preventing him from being any higher is that he didn't really have any huge wins. However, against unranked Florida, he had over 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. At number 8 is Tony Dorsett from 1976. Dorsett had over 1,900 yards and 18 touchdowns, helping lead Pittsburgh to a national championship and winning 83% of first-place Heisman votes. At number 7 is Ricky Williams out of Texas. He had over 2,100 yards and 27 touchdowns, along with 262 yards in the air and another touchdown. And he won 85% of first-place Heisman votes. At number 6, it's Devontae Smith, 2020 Heisman out of Alabama. And he had probably the best receiver season of all time. He had 117 catches for 1,856 yards, as well as 23 touchdowns. And he was the best player on this Alabama team that went on to win the national championship. In the national championship, Devontae Smith was absolutely cooking Ohio State, having 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. At number 5 is Reggie Bush out of USC. And his Heisman actually got taken away for a bit because he was getting paid to be at USC, but obviously nowadays that's normal and they gave it back to him. Anyways, while his numbers are not better than some of the dudes ahead of him, he has the best yards per carry ever by a running back Heisman. He also has the most receiving yards ever from a running back Heisman, having 478 through the air. And Bush received 87.9% of first-place Heisman votes, which is the most ever for a running back. At number 4 is Marcus Mariota. In 2014, Mariota threw for over 4,400 yards, as well as 42 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, which is the best touchdown-interception ratio from any Heisman QB. His best performance came against Florida State in the college football playoff, where he had 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, leading Oregon to a win over Florida State. However, they went on to lose in the national championship. Mariota ended with 88.5% of first-place votes. Mariota was also very, very good on the ground, having 770 yards and 15 touchdowns. All right, now we're in the top 3, and these were almost the hardest to rank. In number 3, I have Cam Newton, 2010 Heisman out of Auburn, and while his passing stats may not seem the best, his rushing stats are the best, as he had 1,473 yards and 20 touchdowns on the ground. But furthermore, he brought this Auburn team to a national championship. This Auburn team was really not that great, and he elevated them so much. And he had many famous moments, beating Alabama in a game with the Cam back, as it is called, as well as the national championship game, where he had 320 yards and 2 touchdowns to beat Oregon. Overall, he is one of the best college players we have ever seen. However, I cannot put him ahead of number 2, Barry Sanders. Out of Oklahoma State, This dude's Heisman season was unreal. He had 2,628 yards and 37 rushing touchdowns. His best performance came against Texas Tech, where he had 332 yards and 4 touchdowns. This is by far the most dominant running back season ever. And Barry Sanders was basically Oklahoma State's entire offense, making him have the greatest running back college football season ever, as well as the second best college football season in general. But there's still one better. 2019 Joe Burrow had the best season we will ever see. Burrow threw 60 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He also had a 76.3 completion percentage, which is the highest out of all Heisman QBs. And he had 5,671 passing yards, also the highest out of all Heisman QBs. He had the largest percentage of first place votes ever, having 94.4% of first place votes going to him. And he led his team to being undefeated with multiple, and multiple is understating it, with numerous big wins in ranked games, with the biggest coming in the national championship against Clemson. Joe Burrow threw for 510 yards and 6 touchdowns, destroying the Clemson Tigers that just won the Natty the year before. I don't think we'll ever see a season this good again. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any video suggestions, please feel free to leave them below. I have been really busy, so it's been kind of hard for me to make these long videos, but I will try whenever I have free time. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe.